And we're live.
Good evening and welcome to Eavan Boland, a Transatlantic tribute. On April 27th, the world lost one of its truest voices with the sudden death of poet Eavan Boland. Eavan's was a very bright star in the firmament of world literature, and the span of her influence is evident in the gathering of voices that are here for you this evening. The arc of this special evening will reflect her life, influence and following in her home city of Dublin, then moves to New York where she lived as a young girl. It follows then to California where she brilliantly encouraged so many new voices at Stanford University. And finally we return to Dublin where her influence lives on powerfully in a new generation of voices. We are immensely grateful to Eavan's family, Kevin, Eavan and Sarah for their support of this evening's event. On behalf of you all, we wish them all our comfort and love at this saddest of times. My co-hosts here today are Rachael Gilkey of the Irish Arts Centre and Christina Ablaza of Stanford's Creative Writing Programme. Poetry Ireland, the Irish Arts Centre and the Embassy of Ireland in America have collaborated to bring this event to you. And special thanks to the people behind the scenes there who have done such great work to gather us all here this evening. Eavan was our editor in Poetry Ireland from 2016 to 2019. Those were very special years for us in Poetry Ireland, and she worked especially closely and well with Paul Lenihan there. She empowered us all, making us walk taller, and she hugely enabled us to reach our mission of connecting people and poetry. We used to fall upon our editorials with the greatest of excitement. Her sure-footedness and clarity were greatly valued by us all. Energy was a word that she used extensively in her poems and prose, and she certainly imbued us and everything she touched with her own unique energy. She reached into all our lives with her exquisite use of language. She once said, "Poetry is not a private domain nor a fiefdom. It is a city whose gates stand wide." She lived by that enjoinder herself, and her work will continue to throw those gates wider still for us all. For this first section, our readers are President Mary Robinson and poets Paula Meehan and Alvy Carragher. Eavan's poem, The Singers, formed part of President Mary Robinson's powerful inauguration address in December 1990. Like Eavan, Mary enabled people to find a voice where they found a vision. We're all grateful to you, Mary, for the incredible work you continue to do to make Ireland an immensely improved society. Paula Meehan was Ireland Professor of Poetry from 2013 to 2016. Like Eavan, poet Paula Meehan invests beauty and truth into life through her work and through her being. She was immensely influenced by Eavan's work.
What do I do when it freezes?
Featured poet in one of her first issues of Poetry Ireland Review. Writing about Alvy's vivid, voice-driven poem, The Men I Keep Under the Bed, Eavan wrote that it draws from both voice and performance, bringing those energies with it in its migration to the page, and it lives in both dimensions with ease and confidence. It is a very great pleasure now to hand you over to President Mary Robinson.
Thank you very much, and I'm really very happy to take part in this tribute to Eavan Boland. Eavan and I were special friends from the time we were students together in Trinity College in Dublin, and I'm going to read her poem Outside History. But before I do that, I just want to recall the different time, which has actually already been mentioned, when Eavan and I discussed Outside History in a different way just before my inauguration as President of Ireland in December 1990. And this led me to say in that address, as a woman, I want women who have felt themselves outside history to be written back into history. In the words of Eavan Boland, finding a voice where they found a vision. Now, the truth is that poem, The Singers, had not been written, but Eavan told me I'm in the process of writing a poem and I know the last line, and I'll give that to you, Mary. The last line is finding a voice where they found a vision. And to me, that was Eavan. That was the generous, wonderful Eavan. And now I want to read her poem, outside history. These are outsiders always, these stars, these iron inklings of an Irish January whose light happened thousands of years before our pain did. They have always been outside history. They keep their distance. Under them remains a place where you found you were human, and a landscape in which you know you are mortal, and a time to choose between them. I have chosen, out of myth and history, to move to be part of that ordeal, whose darkness is only now reaching me from those fields, those rivers, those roads, clotted as firmaments with the dead. How slowly they die. As we kneel beside them, whisper in their ear, and we are too late. We are always too late. Thank you.
Recording.
Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be with you on the occasion of Eavan Boland's Month's Mind. And I'll take the opportunity to send again my heartfelt condolences to Kevin and to Sarah and Eavan and the grandchildren, whom she absolutely adored and took every opportunity to share her adoration with us through photographs and small stories about their lives. So the poem I've chosen to read for you today is called The Necessity for Irony. It's a poem I love because it brings me close to Eavan and some of her preoccupations, lifelong preoccupations. Firstly, it explores the mother-daughter relationship, and we're familiar with that from her earliest poems about nursing her daughters in the night feed, in the long reaches of the night, of picking up their toys and their lives in the suburb of Dundrum. It also explores Eavan's passion as a collector. There's an antique shop in Dublin which has a sign outside saying, "We buy junk and sell antiques." So the line between the two is ill-defined, but Eavan had a fantastic eye and she loved the bargain hunting involved in going out to the fairs and the antique shops and hoking out treasure. And they gave her these finds, gave her many of her great poems. Think of The Woman Painted on a Leaf, a masterpiece of a woman aging and finding a poem, as she says herself, she could die in. And finally, I love it because of the glimpse we get of Eavan as a student long ago, studying the styles and mannerisms of the poetry of the past. When she visited my workshops in Dublin, she would have an unerring eye for that moment in the poem where it becomes mannered, when it begins to fall into the style and practice of the past. And it was a great gift to students to help them to put their fingers on that point, I suppose, where they're writing the poem to the dead rather than the living, or to the future living. So the necessity for irony. On Sundays when the rain held off, after lunch or later, I would go with my 12-year-old daughter into town and put down the time at junk sales, antique fairs. There I would lean over tables absorbed by lace, wooden frames, glass. My daughter stood at the other end of the room, her flame-coloured hair obvious whenever, which was not often, I turned around. I turned around. She was gone, grown, no longer ready to come with me whenever a dry Sunday held out its promises of small histories, endings. When I was young, I studied styles, their use and origin, which age was known for which ornament, and was always drawn to a lyric speech, a civil tone, but never thought I would have the need, as I do now, for a darker one. Spirit of irony, my caustic author of the past, of memory, and of its pain, which returns, hurts, stings, reproach me now, remind me that I was in those rooms with my child, with my back turned to her, searching, oh irony, for beautiful things.
Hi, I'm extremely grateful to be able to pay tribute to and remember Eavan Boland in this way. The poem that I've chosen of hers addresses the goddess of memory, which feels particularly appropriate on a day of remembrance. So this is that poem, To Memory. This is for you, goddess that you are. This is a record for us both. This is a chronicle. There should be more of them. They should be lyrical and factual and true. They should be written down and spoken out on rainy afternoons, instead of which they fall away. So I have written this so it will not. My last childless winter was the same as all the other ones. Outside my window, the motherless landscape hoarded its own kind. Light fattened the shadows, frost harried the snowdrops. There was a logic to it, the way my mother loved astrology. She came from a valley in the country where everything that was haphazard and ill-timed about our history had happened. And so it seemed natural that what she wanted most were the arts of the predetermined. My child was born at the end of winter. How to prove it? Not the child, of course, who slept in pre-spring darkness, but the fact that the ocean, moonless, stripped of current, entered the room quietly one evening and lay down in the weave of the rug and could be seen shifting and sighing in blue-green sizzle. And I said nothing about it, then or later, to anyone. And when the spring arrived, I was ready to see a single field in the distance on the Dublin hills allow its heathery colour to detach itself and come upstairs and settle in the corner of the room farthest from the window. I could, of course, continue. I could list for you a whole inventory of elements and fixed entities that broke away and found themselves disordered in that season, assembling, dispersing, and without a thought for laws that until then had barred an apple flower from opening out at midnight, or lilac rooting in the coldest part of ocean. Then it stopped. Little by little, what was there came back, slowly at first, then surely. I realized what had happened was secret, hardly possible to be remembered always, which is why you are listening as rain comes down, restored to its logic, responsive to air and land. And I am telling you this, you are, after all, not simply the goddess of memory. You have 9 daughters yourself and can understand.
I'm a singer-songwriter based in Dublin, Ireland. I first became aware of Eavan Boland when I was doing my leaving certificate in school in County Kildare, and I've had a long and lovely relationship with her words ever since. They've brought me much joy and solace at different times in my life. So I've prepared a couple of my own pieces for this tribute. I hope you enjoy them. Thank you.
Sun on the hillside, no cloud in the sky. Birds flying low, whole mountain so high. Lover abandoned, but what of that? Wings on the water, tides turning so fast. like leaves in the grass. Nature, what could be better than better than that, better than that. I'm free as a spirit, better than that. Lovers go with stillness of snow, beauty of eyes watching them go. I'll think of you often and what came to be. The one who walked me down to the sea to watch the wild waters break on the rocks, washing away all that was lost. Better than that, better than that. Free as a spirit, better than that. Better than that, better than that. I'm free as a spirit, better than
That was Better Than That by Loah, performed in her home in Dublin. Loah is Sally Matthew Garnett, a multi-instrumentalist and singer-songwriter combining multiple influences in her work. We will hear from Loah again a little later in the program. I'm Rachael Gilkey, Director of Programming and Education at Irish Arts Centre. I'm honored to introduce our readers for this next section of our transatlantic journey to celebrate the life, work, and impact that Eavan Boland made on the world. The first reader is Daniel Mulhall, Ireland's ambassador to the United States and a great lover of Irish poetry, where you'll find him tweeting a poem each day over the past 6 years. The ambassador is followed by the poet Marie Howe, author of multiple collections of poetry, and most recently of Magdalene, which is longlisted for the National Book Award. Amongst other accolades, Marie served as the New York State Poet Laureate from 2012 to 2014. We will then be joined by Kevin Young, author of 13 books of poetry and prose, including Brown, and the upcoming anthology, African American Poetry, 250 Years of Struggle in Song, which he's edited and is forthcoming September 2020. Kevin is also director of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture and poetry editor of The New Yorker. Following Kevin is award-winning novelist and playwright Belinda McKeon, whose work includes the novels Solace and Tender. Belinda teaches at Rutgers University, where her students are very lucky indeed. And finally, we will hear from Geraldine Byrne Nason, Ireland's permanent representative to the United Nations, a post she has held since 2017, and in which capacity she commissioned Eavan to write a poem, Our Future Will Become the Past of Other Women, to mark the centenary of women's suffrage in Ireland. Please welcome Ambassador Daniel Mulhall.
It's a real honor for me to be here to pay tribute to Eavan Boland, and I want to add my condolences to those of others, to her family and friends at this great loss. As you say, I've been tweeting daily Irish poetry for 6 years now, and frequently tweeted passages from Eavan because I recognized her as a great Irish poet, one of our leading poets indeed, and that she was not just an Irish poet, but one who had a global reach. And I've been conscious also of the impact she had on Irish poetry, which I've been a fan of since I was at school in Waterford and college in Cork, where I knew a lot of poets. And I did a little bit of research, and I my oldest collection is the Sphere book of modern Irish poetry, published in 1972, edited by Derek Mahon. And of the 45 poets in this collection, just 2 are women, Eleni Quillinan and Eavan Boland. My most recent collection is the one that I use a lot, Wind Harp, which was published in 2016. It contains poems of Ireland for the past 100 years or so. And there, I'm happy to say that 46 out of the 129 poets represented are Irish women poets. So that, I think, is an indication of the impact that Eavan has had and her generation have had on changing the landscape of Irish poetry and bringing new subjects and new voices into play. And in fact, if you look at that book, if you look at the second half of the book, at least 50%, if not more, are actually women poets. I want to also just mention that my own personal connection with Eavan was that when I was ambassador in London, I realized that I was living in a building which her father, Freddie Boland, one of my predecessors, had occupied, and that Eavan had lived there for 5 or so years as a young girl, and in fact had written about it in her memoir. And I invited her to come and stay with us, and she did so. And my wife Greta and I had a memorable couple of days with Eavan, and she was able to tell us, how the embassy, how the residents, the same building she lived in the 1950s, had been at that time, and she was able to recognize her own room, and she gave a wonderful reading at the embassy on that occasion, and left us with very, very fond memories of her. We were looking forward to seeing her again on one of our next visits to California, but sadly that will not now be possible. I want to read The Emigrant Irish, which I think is one of the finest poems of emigration. And about a month ago, just before Eavan died, I had no idea that she was ill or anything. I decided since the pandemic started, I've been tweeting daily readings of Irish poetry, and I decided to post a reading of The Emigrant Irish, because I felt it related to the current predicament of say people in our community in the United States who maybe are suffering because of the impact of, particularly those who lost their jobs and are being affected by the impact of the coronavirus. And I wanted to make the point, I wanted to first of all pay tribute to the Irish around the country who've rallied round and tried to help vulnerable members of our community to tide themselves over this difficult period. But I also felt that this was a message that I could send that Irish immigrants have had difficulties going back decades, and that therefore, and Eavan's poem is a reminder of those tribulations, to show that this is not the first time in our history that Irish people have had to deal with tribulations. And this is called The Emigrant Irish. Like oil lamps, we put them out the back of our houses, of our minds. We had lights better than, newer than. And then a time came, this time and now. We need them, their dread makeshift example. They would have thrived on our necessities. What they survived, we could not even live. By their lights, now it is time to imagine how they stood there, what they stood with, that their possessions may become our power. Cardboard, iron, their hardships parceled in them, patience, fortitude, long suffering in the bruise-colored dusk of the new world, and all the old songs and nothing to lose. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Marie Howe. I'm very honored to be here. I have to show you something. It's a washing machine. I keep thinking of Eavan. The Zoom people tell you to make a nice background. So I pulled the curtain over, and then as we're talking about Eavan Boland and her work, I keep thinking about this washing machine behind me, and how she was a poet who put that in her poems, the washing machine, the toys on the floor. When I first saw Eavan Boland read, it was in the 80s. He was in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I remember the seat I was sitting in as I listened to her at the blacksmith shop reading series. Seamus Heaney was teaching at Harvard then. I'm sure he invited her. I remember thinking, this is a woman. This is a woman speaking. Now, I had been taught by men mostly. Of course, I'd read women, a few, of course. I'd searched for them, but I'd never seen a woman speak as she did so easily about ordinary life. And she was a mother. And I'm a mother of a 20-year-old daughter. So I'm going to read a poem that means a great deal to me called The Pomegranate. The Pomegranate. The only legend I have ever loved is the story of a daughter lost in hell and found and rescued there. Love and blackmail are the gist of it. Ceres and Persephone, the names. And the best thing about the legend is I can enter it anywhere and have. As a child in exile in a city of fogs and strange consonants, I read it first, and at first I was an exiled child in the crackling dusk of the underworld, the stars blighted. Later, I walked out in a summer twilight, searching for my daughter at bedtime. When she came running, I was ready to make any bargain to keep her. I carried her past white beams and wasps and honey-scented bedalias, but I was Ceres then, and I knew winter was in store for every leaf on every tree on that road, was inescapable for each one we passed, and for me. It is winter, and the stars are hidden. I climb the stairs and stand where I can see my child asleep beside her teen magazines, her can of Coke, her plate of uncut fruit. Sorry, I lost my place. Her plate of uncut fruit. The pomegranate. How did I forget it? She could have come home and been safe and ended the story and all our heartbroken searching, but she reached out a hand and plucked a pomegranate. She put out her hand and pulled down the French sound for apple and the noise of stone and the proof that even in the place of death, at the heart of legend, in the midst of rocks, full of unshed tears, ready to be diamonds by the time the story was told, a child can be hungry. I could warn her, there is still a chance. The rain is cold, the road is flint colored, the suburb has cars and cable television. The veiled stars are above ground. It is another world. But what else can a mother give her daughter but such beautiful rifts in time? If I defer the grief, I will diminish the gift. The legend will be hers as well as mine. She will enter it as I have. She will wake up. She will hold the papery flushed skin in her hand and to her lips. I will say nothing. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kevin Young. Thank you so much for allowing me to help honor Eavan's memory and celebrate her work. Years ago, I was a student at Stanford shortly before Eavan began her tenure there. A longtime fan of hers, I was fortunate that she invited me back a number of times recently, including last year. To me, she was always generous and fierce with a knowing grin. Last February, I took 2 poems of her for The New Yorker, where I'm poetry editor. And as I told her then, I would gladly have taken all she sent. The poems were just incredible. We happened to run one, Eviction, on what turned out to be the day she died. We ran the other, The Fire Gilder, the week after, along with what must be one of the last recordings she ever made. I'll read that poem, a kind of ars poetica, or metaphor for poetry's fiery power tonight. The Fire Gilder. She loved silver. She loved gold, my mother. She spoke about the influence of metals, the congruence of atoms, the art classes where she learned these things. Think of it, she would say, as she told me to gild any surface. A master craftsman had to meld gold with mercury, had to heat both, so one was volatile, one was not. And to do it right, had to separate them and then burn mercury until it fled and left behind a skin of light. The only thing, she added, but what came after that, I forgot. What she spent a lifetime forgetting could be my subject. The fenced-in small towns of Leinster, the coastal villages where the language of the sea was handed on, phrases bruised by storms, but by shipwrecks, but isn't. My subject is the part wishing plays in the way villages are made to vanish, in the way I learned to separate memory from knowledge, so one was volatile, one was not, and how I started writing, burning light, building heat until all at once I was the fire gilder, ready to lay radiance down, ready to decorate. It happened with it never did, when all at once I remember what it was she said. The only thing is, it is extremely dangerous. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Belinda McKeon, and I didn't realize that the poem that I decided to read would be quite so much on the nose, as these circumstances have necessitated. But I'm going to read a poem called Night Feed, which was very important to me when I first discovered Eavan's work 20 years ago. It's a beautiful poem about her getting up to feed her baby daughter in the middle of the night. And I apologize to my fellow panelists who had to see me bobbing my son for the entire event. So hopefully he will quieten and we can read this poem with illustrations. Night Feed. This is dawn. Believe me, this is your season, little daughter. The moment daisies open, the hour mercurial rainwater makes a mirror for sparrows. It's time we drowned our sorrows. I tiptoe in. I lift you up, wriggling in your rosy, zipped sleeper. Yes, this is the hour for the early bird in me, when finder is keeper. I crook the bottle. How you suckle. This is the best I can be. Housewife to this nursery where you hold on, dear life. A slit of milk, the last suck. And now your eyes are open, birth-colored and offended. Earth wakes. You go back to sleep. The feed is ended. Worms turn. Stars go in. Even the moon is losing face. Poplars stilt for dawn. And we begin the long fall from grace. I took you in.
remember and celebrate Eavan Boland. Eavan was a trailblazer. She broke the mold of Irish poetry in many ways. One of the most important was by giving voice to the Irish women who had played a significant role in Irish history, which had been lost, or erased. Her unvarnished and faithful representation of women, not only in history, but also in contemporary Irish life, inspired many young women of my own generation. Eavan also had a special connection to the United Nations, a world she knew well from her childhood, where her father served as Ireland's permanent representative and our only president of the UN General Assembly. It's no surprise then that in 2018, when it came to marking 100 years since the women of Ireland won the right to suffrage, we turned to Eavan. She graciously agreed to write a poem to mark the occasion. Her poem, Our Future Will Become the Past of Other Women, is, I believe, a masterpiece, and it was launched at the United Nations in New York on the 5th of December 2018. The poem gives voice to the generations of women who came before us and who fought to have their voices heard. As chair of the UN Commission on the Status of Women in 2018 and 2019, I saw this poem of Irish women's experience as a signal of hope for all those women across the globe for whom the work of respect and equality still continues. What we saw on that day was that Eavan had found the universal voice for women. As Eavan's poem says, "And so we share this day with women everywhere, for those who find the rights they need to be hard-won, not guaranteed." Eavan's untimely passing is mourned by all who knew her, including our family here at the Irish Permanent Mission in New York, where we truly came to regard Eavan as one of our own.
If you want to belong, it is said you must dance. Savor your moves, you'll know all your being. Harvest and toil until at last they are for birthing. Unleash them upon the air of now, upon the throngs of sails in our ears. Give us your song, your song, your song. Give us your song, your song, your If you want to go home, it is said you must dance. For as the flavor of your spirit changes, its shape in visible chaos, its form burning mist, you are compelled to see this through. Your right belonging to this place, you belong to this place.
Thank you, Loah. That was beautiful. I'm Christina Ablaza, and I had the great privilege of working with Eavan for more than 10 years as an administrator in Stanford's creative writing program. Eavan was many things to all of us here today: friend, teacher, mentor, and literary icon. She was also a brilliant administrator and recognized the importance of institutional support for writers of all levels. The undergraduate writing poetry for the first time, the Stegner Fellow just beginning a literary career, and our acclaimed lecturers and faculty. Under her care, the creative writing program has grown into a vibrant center for the arts on campus and has helped nurture thousands of writers, both amateur and at the very height of literary careers. It was wonderful working with her, and I'll miss her very much. I'm honored to introduce our next distinguished speakers. Jenny A. Durkan is the 56th mayor of Seattle and the first woman to lead the city in nearly a century. She served as the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Washington, becoming the first openly gay U.S. attorney in the country's history. While at college, Durkan spent a school year in Dublin studying Irish history, literature, and language at the School of Irish Studies. In that time, she met and studied with Eavan, whose work she has read and admired ever since. Tobias Wolff is among America's most celebrated writers. Alongside his memoirs, This Boy's Life and In Pharaoh's Army, he has published 4 short story collections and 2 award-winning novels. In 2015, he received a National Medal of Arts from President Obama. Now retired from teaching, he was a professor at Stanford for more than 20 years, where he came to know Eavan as a close friend and colleague. Solmaz Sharif is assistant professor in creative writing at Arizona State University. Her work has been recognized with the Discovery Boston Review Poetry Prize, Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award, and an NEA Fellowship. Her first collection, Look, was a finalist for the National Book Award in Poetry. She worked closely with Eavan at Stanford as a former Stegner Fellow and Jones Lecturer, and Eavan greatly admired her work. Chelsea Clinton is a global health advocate and award-winning children's author. While completing her undergraduate degree at Stanford, she attended lectures and readings hosted by Eavan and came to admire her as a poet, a teacher, and an activist. Please welcome Mayor Jenny Durkan.
Thank you so much, and it's truly an honor to be here today. As she indicated, when I was just 20 and 21 years old, I spent a year in Dublin and was able to study under Eavan, and she had a dramatic impact on my life. It was both her fierceness and the gentleness of her writing. She showed just by how she lived and what she did that she could destroy the constructs that have been placed on her as a woman in Ireland. The poem that I chose for a number of reasons. One, my deep condolences to the family. I think this poem shows her love for her family, her love for Ireland, and also shows that though she was a fierce and dedicated citizen of Ireland, she also in herself was an immigrant because she spent part of her childhood and her adulthood away from Ireland. And so though I think poetry is hard-coded in our genetic roots, the gift of poetry is so rare, and she was one of the rarest, so it's an honor to be able to read this. I'm reading The Lost Land. I have 2 daughters. They are all I ever wanted from the earth, or almost all. I also wanted one piece of ground, one city trapped by hills, one urban river, an island in its element. So I could say mine, my own, and mean it. Now they are grown up and far away, and memory itself has become an emigrant, wandering in a place where love dissembles itself as a landscape, where the hills are the colors of a child's eyes, where my children are distances, horizons. At night, on the edge of sleep, I can see the shore of Dublin Bay, its rocky sweep and its granite pier. Is this, I say, how they must have seen it? Backing out on the mailboat at twilight, shadows falling on everything they had to leave and would love forever. And then I imagine myself at the landward rail of that boat, searching for the last sight of a hand. I see myself on the underworld side of that water, the darkness coming in fast, saying all the names I know for a lost land. Ireland, absence, daughters. Thank you.
Hello. Am I supposed to do something? I hope. Spotlighted here. Okay.
No, you're
Okay.
Can they hear?
Unmute myself? What
Yeah,
do I
do that.
do? Okay.
Right there.
I hope you can hear me. Eavan was one of my best friends over the last almost 25 years, one of the best friends I've ever had. And I can only begin to imagine the sense of loss that Kevin and Eavan and Sarah feel. I'm with you in my heart. Eavan was an extraordinary person to have worked with all these years. One thing that perhaps hasn't come out so much in our conversation today, she was really funny. I don't think I ever left her office without laughing, on the way out still laughing. She was an absolute artist at navigating department politics and had this exquisite sense of irony about it. She could play the game, but she also stood apart from it, watched it, and was a wonderful reporter, a political reporter in a sense. She also had a bit of a temper when she chose to deploy it. And there was a sense of performance about her use of temper. Never in her own interest. It was always to make sure the deans coughed up money for the young writers to get through the summer, or to make sure somebody's insurance covered the birth of their child. And but she and I, all the time that we knew each other, really only butted head once. We really went at it. And we didn't speak to each other for a couple of days. And then I went down to her office to have it out some more with her. And we just looked at each other across her desk and burst out laughing. There was nothing else to do. I mean, we were family. Oh, I will miss her so much. I'm going to read a poem of hers called This Moment. Others have talked about her wonderful sense of her children, family. It's a sense she extended to this whole program we taught in. She abjured kind of the grand gestures in her poetry, the heroic, but I do think there was a kind of heroic quality in her attention to the familiar, the domestic, to the life we actually live from moment to moment. And this poem, This Moment, is a beautiful rendition of a moment in which you feel the future coiled. It is a beautiful poem. This moment. A neighborhood at dusk. Things are getting ready to happen out of sight. Stars and moths and rinds slanting around fruit, but not yet. One tree is black. One window is yellow as butter. A woman leans down to catch a child who has run into her arms this moment. Stars rise, moths flutter, apples sweeten in the dark. Thank
you. I'm honored to be here. I was very fortunate to be Eavan's student for several years and to be in her workshop in her office where hour after hour we were invited and expected, in fact, to stake a claim and to articulate our principles around poetry and its impossible intersection with history and politics and nation and self, and where she was preparing us really not just for writing a better stanza, but for every room that we will enter as a poet, and for every fight we will have to undertake to charge a singular path through history, particularly for the dispossessed among us. And we spoke of many things, and I remain so grateful, especially to her in our conversations around home and in her encouragement to me to return to Iran, for example, after 10 years of not going, and all of our conversations around displacement and dispossession and exile. And so I wanted to read a poem of hers that speaks to this kinship, and it's called The Lost Art of Letter Writing. The ratio of daylight to handwriting was the same as lace making to eyesight. The paper was so thin it skinned air. The hand was fire and the page tinder. Everything burned away except the one place they singled out between fingers held over a letter pad they set aside for the long evenings of their leave-takings, always asking after what they kept losing, always performing. Even when a shadow fell across the page and they knew the answer was not forthcoming, the same action. First the leaning down, then the pen becoming a staff to walk fields with as they vanished underfoot into memory. Then the letting up, the lighter stroke, which brought back crane's bill and thistle, a bicycle wheel resting, an iron circle hurting the grass again, and the hedges veiled in hawthorn again, just in time for the main novenas recited in sweet air on a road leading to another road, then another one, widening to a motorway with 4 lanes, ending in a new town on the edge of a city they will never see. And if we say an art is lost when it no longer knows how to teach a sorrow to speak, come, see the way we lost it, stacking letters in the attic, going downstairs so as not to listen to the fields stirring at night as they became memory, and in the morning as they became ink. What we did so as not to hear them whispering the only question they knew by heart, the only one they learned from all those epistles of air and unreachable distance, how to ask. Is it still there?
Hello, I'm Chelsea Clinton, and I arrived at Stanford not too long after Professor Boland did. And while I was never one of her creative writing students, I was among the countless students at Stanford whose lives Professor Boland enriched, enlivened, and certainly among those whom she inspired. She was unfailingly generous to anyone who had questions, as I sometimes did after her open lecture series or after the various Irish literary events that she would organize. And she always welcomed conversations and kind of shared imaginings, even for those of us who never formally sat in her classroom. I was so deeply saddened to learn of her passing last month, and am I'm so honored to be even a small part of this celebration today. Her book that touched me most actually is one that she wrote, or at least published, long after I left Stanford, A Woman Without a Country. And the poem in it that spoke to me most, perhaps not surprisingly, was Talking to My Daughter Late at Night. Her book of poems was published, at least in the United States, in late 2014, shortly after I gave birth to my first daughter, Charlotte. So perhaps it isn't too surprising that this poem resonated with me then and still kind of deeply echoes through my heart and my body and my hopes still today. So, Talking to My Daughter Late at Night. We have a tray, a pot of tea, a scone. This is the hour when one thing pours itself into another. The gable of our house stored in shadow, a spring planet bending ice into an absolute of light. Your childhood ended years ago. There is no path back to it. There is no certainty I can find. The if or maybe that might remedy an afternoon you walked up the hill after school. In winter, in tears. The fire smolders down into cinders. Lilac shivers in the March dark. If love is a civilization, as I once hoped it was, and you and I are its living citizens, and if our words are less than rules and more than remedies, as we speak, maybe someone escapes from a wounded morning in a small classroom and finds the world is not stern after all. Paper birds are folded and fly off in the playground. And when lessons resume in the afternoon, the essay is easy. It is a day in the life of a penny. Afterwards at tea time, the sweets have old names. Cinder, toffee, bullseye, marry me quick. The children shout out and I listen to hear your voice with theirs. But no, it's here now telling me how late the hour is. The bird's almost up. And we smile at this as we put the tray away, douse the fire, and wash out the cups. Thank you, Professor Boland. You will be missed and you will always, always be remembered.
Thank you so much to everyone for those remarkable contributions. I'm sure that it has given great comfort to all of us who miss Eavan and will. It's fantastic to know how she has brought so many of us around the world together, and her work, of course, will endure and will give us that comfort in time to come. Thanks to everybody involved in putting this evening's event together. One of the highlights for me last year was student Michael Tient giving an impromptu reading of Eavan's powerful poem, Quarantine, a poem, of course, that has been very much evoked in recent months. This happened in December at the National Library of Ireland for Poetry Aloud, a competition for secondary school students, which Poetry Ireland delivers with their partners, the National Library of Ireland, with generous support from University College Cork. Michael is a student at Marino College, Dublin, and was the senior winner. Thanks to all of you for tuning in this evening. We enjoyed your company very much. Look after yourselves and please stay in touch with these organisations. And it's a very great pleasure to ask Michael to close out our special evening for us. Thank you.
Quarantine by Eavan Boland. In the worst hour of the worst season, of the worst year, of a whole people, a man set out from the workhouse with his wife. He was walking. They were both walking north. She was sick with famine fever and could not keep up. He lifted her and put her on his back. He walked like that, west and north, until at nightfall, under freezing stars, they arrived. In the morning, they were both found dead, of cold, of hunger, of the toxins of a whole history. But her feet were held against his breastbone. The last heat of his flesh was his last gift to her. Let no love poem ever come to this threshold. There is no place here for the inexact praises of the easy graces and sensuality of the body. There was only time for this merciless inventory. Their death together in the winter of 1847, also what they suffered, how they lived, and what there is between a man and woman, and in which darkness it can best be proved. Thank you.